fundamentals in programming, especially with loops as perspective. And the objective of this session will be as to how to go ahead and apply this knowledge into block codes, and I will teach you that as well. If you attended the session A sequence, you would have understood a lot about block codes, whether it is Minecraft or Make Code from Microsoft. You would have understood that it is very easy for you to take that knowledge, apply it with the knowledge that you may have as a foundational skill sets in programming, and make your interaction with the student even more interesting, even though you are not necessarily teaching coding. Yeah, you could apply it in a lot of other things that you do in your physics labs, and you're probably in trying to make your sections a little more interesting. It's left to your imagination, because all of what you learn is not necessarily just pure for the coding as a for a teaching purpose, right? It's always good to have that knowledge because it's the structured curriculum that's available to you in the form of presentations and handbooks on the CBSE portal today. While you can see that everything that you will see on these screens, go back to those PowerPoints and you will be able to associate yourselves very easily. But it will also be very important for you to apply this knowledge and make it even interesting for your students. Okay, so that being said, what we are going to be talking a lot about today is the fundamentals of loops and where loops are used in conjunction to coding and scenarios of coding, your use case, and how you could actually use block code in a very simple way, because fundamentally you have to understand this. Any iconic programming, or what you call block codes, are pictorial depictions of a function or a piece of code. Okay, now through and delivered to you through a simple framework. Okay, and these are interactive frameworks. And Make Code from Microsoft, or even Minecraft for that matter, make it very easy for you to take these blocks, and these blocks from a layman perspective are pictorial, iconic in nature, but have code written at the back end that you need not worry about the nitty-gritties of the syntax, but you need to worry about it, the functionality of that block, right? So again, I repeat, you do not have to understand the nitty-gritties of the syntax of the code underlying within that block, but you need to know the purpose or the utilization of that block for the right reasons. Okay, so now if we understand that, it is very easy for anybody to write code. And the future of all coding is getting to the state where almost everything that we talk about today as repetitive tasking is either through block codes or what people call today codeless programming. Okay, so this is the foundation of this session, and you will understand, for those of you who have no great computer background or programming background, I would correct myself. I would cover some very fundamentals, okay, as fast as I can, so that we can get into the demo of using loops in block code format. Before I jump into that, I will quickly actually run a small demo on block code to set the context before I get into the foundational aspect of giving you the basic fundamentals of computers or coding or computer sciences. Okay, so what I'll do now is I will actually swap my screen into a live interactive session using block codes, and I'll run a small program which is basically a loop. Okay, and then I will explain to you in detail as to how and why this code is doing what it is doing from a code perspective, so that you will be able to understand not only the pictorial format of the code, but also the underlying part of the code. And so that the end, I will run a longer demo for you so that we can take a little more complex example and you will understand all the functionalities of these blocks, how loops are used, how conditions are applied, how operators are put into place, and you get the desired result. Okay, so just give me a second and I'll swap my screen now. So I hope you can see the screen. So I am assuming that you've gone through a detailed sessions in as part of the earlier sections of what we call session A on block codes. And I'm assuming that you've had an opportunity to delve into either make code or let's say even Minecraft underlying block codes. Okay, I've taken something very, very simple. Okay, now I will break it down and explain to you how this is done. Okay, now if you need access to and play and you really want to play with, let's say, make code, please go to the URL makecode.microbit.org. I don't want to confuse this session any more than what it is going to be starting with, but MakeCode is one of the frameworks available to you. And this, for my belief, is the easiest and the best platform to play, because you can also build not only games on different devices, but you can also use the same for Minecraft as well. Okay, so this makes it a very compelling piece of block code framework for anybody to introduce coding at a very entry level to students. So as educators, you will find that initially it's a challenge to get students excited to code. And once you get pictorial with it, I know you would have probably touched Scratch and other easy to use coding languages, but you will be surprised that make code is even more interactive, which you can actually go build very, very complex, not only games, but code that you could write using make code. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to just quickly run through this small piece of code that I've written to introduce you to loops. Okay, now this is a very simple one from a usage point of view. All it does is, if you look at this on the left side of your screen, this is called a microbit. So microbit is a hardware that you can purchase in the market, and it is promoted by BBC, and these are very cheap 8-bit boards that you could buy, and this has many interesting things that you could do with it, especially if you want to display something on a screen, because this has a set of LED screens also embedded. It has a button A, it has a button B, and then these are points, with different volts and ground. I'll get to that later, but we'll just worry for now button A and button B to start with. Okay, now if you look at this block that I have put together, is an iteration. All it says is, on button A pressed, basically it says when I press this button A, it sets a variable. Okay, now you have in programming, all of you are probably aware that there are variables that you need to set as or declare depending on the coding language. You could, in certain coding languages, you need to declare your variable at an early stage. Maybe and if you are familiar with Python, you will realize that you don't have to declare a variable at an early stage. You could declare it on the fly. So here we are declaring a variable and assigning a value called phi to it. And we are putting a loop, a conditional loop, that you repeat this 4 times. And when you repeat it 4 times, you please change the value of the variable by -1. Basically, it's an operator. You're saying 5 minus 1, 4 minus 1, 3 minus 1, 2 minus 1. OK, and then show me the value of the variable. So if you look at the entire code, if I break down this into pseudocode or simple English, all I have said is when I press button A, please take the variable called test1, and I've assigned a value to it called 5, initializing it at 5. And then you please take that 5, minus it by 1, reassign the value of the variable to 5 minus 1, which is 4, and go back to the initial beginning of the loop. As simple as that, right? So in pseudocode, this is all it does. So when I run now, if you look, it starts with 4, 3, 2, 1, and it stops there because the conditions have been met, because I've said iterate it only 4 times. If I change that and I make it 5, and I now run the program, it will stop at 0. When I press A, it will stop at 0. Right? So that's why. Now we'll just go ahead and probably build all of this once so that it gives you some kind of a understanding. So in make code, it is very simple that if I have to first give a condition saying that I have to press A, so that means it's an input. So I take this icon called on button A pressed. OK, this is the beginning of the code that I have taken. Then what is the next one is I have to declare a variable to display. So what I would do here is I would create a variable. Go to variable. I have just created. You could just say make a variable and give it a name. So here, let's say we give it a name test3. OK, or maybe just give test3. It creates a variable for you. And here I could pull it and keep it here, or I can trash it. OK, but however, now what I want is I have to set the variable. So I take the block code saying that set the variable and add it to my body of my code. And I can, since I have created test3 now, I'm just taking test3 as a variable. And let's say we started at 5. OK, so we have declared the variable now, and we have declared the variable to and initialized it to 5. Now what do we want? We want to create a loop. We want this to iterate a multiple number of times and do our task of displaying a decremental value on the screen. So what I'm going to do is take loops. This is where I'm going to use, and I'm going to take this very simple block saying that I want to repeat it. Now here what I have done is I want to repeat it, let's say 5 times or 0 times. It doesn't matter. OK, so here is my next condition. OK, my first condition was I've initialized the variable and declare it at 5. Now I'm getting into the loop condition and saying, please loop, run this program 5 times. And then comes, what does it have to do 5 times? There you're going to say, please change the value of test3. Yeah, please change the value of test3. 1 second, please. Just give me a second. So you will say, please test the value, decrement the value of the variable called test3 by -1. So then what do? I go to the variable and set. I can say set, or I can say set. I would say because I used it initially. I will say change. I will use the change and I will fill it in there by -1. So that's simple as that. OK, now that it has done that, it has to do something with this information, right? So what am I going to do? I'm going to do something very simple by saying, please show the variable, right? So I'm going to just say, please show the variable. But now it shows a number. It doesn't show the variable, right? So all I can do is take the variable test3 that I want and put it here, because that's what I wanted to show, right? If I don't put this, let's say, if I execute this program, you look, so what will happen? OK, now I press this, it will show 0 because all in spite of what it has done, the logic of this, if you look at a pseudocode, end of the day, just saying display 0. We don't want that, right? So we want it to display the value of the variable. So we take the variable test3 and I just plug it in there. Now what happens? Interesting. So when I execute this program, I press this 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Right? That's it. That's as simple as it can get for you. Now, this is just the foundation of loops I've given you. We'll get to a little more complicated and fun stuff. But before that, what I want to do is take into consideration all of you who are probably not coming with a great coding background. And I'm going to make some assumptions and start and run through this as fast as I can so that you are actually not at a disadvantage by attending this kind of a session, because when you want to go back and teach your students, you want to be very clear that you not only learn how to use math code at a basic level, but you can play with it, but you've understood the foundations of coding as well. You've all used algorithms and you all know what algorithms are, right? So it's basically nothing but a step-by-step plan, whatever that you would like to do. Now, there is a step-by-step approach to everything because it's a logical sequence of events. A logical string of events is nothing but an algorithm. The moment you put a logical string together, and these logical strings have a purpose. Every block in that logical sequence does something. Let's say in this example, which is there in your handbook as well, when you go through it, you will understand that if we are doing a search for a word in a dictionary, let's say we are going and looking for a word called Mukesh. The logic would be when you build an algorithm, you would go look up the dictionary. First of all, you would look for the word M. Then let's say, or if you're looking for a word proxy, it's the same for us in this example. I'll make it proxy for this example from an example point of view instead of Mukesh. Let's say we're looking for a term called proxy in your dictionary. You go look for a P, then you add P and then R, you know the sequence. Then you go make the word PRO, add the string. Within that string, you add one more alphabet called X, and then finally the fifth Y, and then you look for an exact match. Now, that's as simple as an algorithm can get. So you take that string, break it down into individual characters, add them, concatenate them, and then create your search. And then you look for a accurate match of that sequence. So that's as simple as what it is getting to. Now, let's say a similar thing, if you're looking at when you restructure your thought process into, let's say, blocks of representation in a diagrammatic format, it is called a flowchart. Now, in coding, you can express your code or express your plan to build the code or the logical sequence of your code in either an algorithmic fashion, a flowchart approach, or pseudocode. Pseudocode is in pretty much simple English, putting it together in English. All work fine, just that it's for what purpose you're putting it all together, right? Now, when you take a flowchart, you put symbols to it because it's a standard, and then you take the representation of the sequence of your thought process and put it into these blocks so that pictorially it gives you a systematic flow as a workflow or information flow, decision flow towards your final objective. Okay, so it's very simple, and I'm assuming that most of you, when you go and teach these to your younger kids, you're probably teaching these in 4th grades or 3rd grade maybe, or even 6th grade today, but this is there for you as part of your syllabus. So hence it might be interesting to actually take all of this and make it even more interesting with block codes. Even building a flowchart can become interesting. You could actually make it very interesting by putting it all together in block code as well. That's where your innovativeness can come into play to make your sessions even more interesting by covering the fundamentals well enough so that the child is able to retain that information very efficiently. So everything that we saw in the flowchart, there is a standard. For example, if you take a diamond, it's a decision process. If you're taking, let's say, a button with an oval ends or the oval sides, semicircular sides as a box, you could call it a terminal, or you could call it a basically a start, stop, or halt icon. So these are all some things that you would probably learn as part of your teaching process, and it is something that becomes imperative for you to cover within your subject lines. Now, you will understand that flowcharts are very important because these add some kind of systematic approach to a child when they're learning how to build code. Block coding is easy, but even in block coding, please understand that you need to, at one point, you need to have different kinds of flowcharts or pseudocodes that you need to put together, right? Otherwise, you will not be able to write. It can become very complex. Block coding is easy, but within block coding also you need to know how to script your block code in a sequence. So it may help to be very clear with flowcharts. Like for example, you've given this example, you could, if this is going to be running in a loop, you could put this into your block code as well, but it has to be done in a sequential order. This could be a good example that you could teach by building a very simple example using block code and loops, where you're taking a student's age and doing a conditional check. If it's less or greater than 13, and if it's a decision of less than 13, then you will say you print it as a child, or if it's greater than 13, you print it as a teenager. And the decision making process decides the sequence of the code as to where it would continue or where it would terminate, right? So that's as simple as that from a flowchart point of view. The same thing, I think pseudocode will be very useful for block coding, because pseudocode is the one that students need to learn to write, because this is also very simple English. But this is from my perspective, and when I realized that kids learn it better when you put pseudocode together and actually allow them to build block coding. So I think if you look at a simple pseudocode like this, where you're trying to decide what is profit and loss, let's say, and you want to print that. So you can declare a variable, or you can just say, you can read what a cost price is, read what a selling price is. If selling price is greater or equal to cost price, then you know it's a profit, else it is a loss. And depending what you want it to do as an output, do you want to print it? You can add a print statement and say print profit, print loss, and then the program ends. So, and if you want this to be iterative, you want to take a sequence of cost prices and selling prices of different products, and then run it into a loop so that these are doing repetitive tasks, then you can always say that I can use a loop to do the same exact block of processing, and if it meets certain conditions, I will exit the loop, or I will retain and stay and process within that loop. So loops are essentially what you will be, which you are all familiar with, is conditional processing of information meeting certain criteria, and it will repeat itself until the criteria is met or not met, and then you have a next set of actions that a program can do. Now, as a part of this iterations, you have certain decision making, which is what I was saying. You can use a flowchart, or you could use pseudocode, and pseudocode, in my impression, is a very useful way of teaching children block coding. This could be a very powerful tool actually for them, and that makes it even more easier for them. For those of you who don't know what variables are, well, there are different types of variables, and they perform different kinds of functions and operations. And for those of you who are already familiar with integers or variables, just for those who are not, for example, an integer, if you're trying to give a value to a variable, and that's an integer type, then it's pretty much either a negative number or a positive number or a zero, but not a decimal number. So anything that has no decimals is an integer. Anything that has a decimal number anything which has more than one, let's say, if you're looking at what we call floating numbers. So if these floating point numbers are used, basically you could have a decimal value or a double decimal value or a double data type, depending on the length of your character, of your value or your variable. You could decide it to be a declaring it as a double data type or an ordinary type. Now, basically, please remember floating points are with decimal numbers, and you also have characters as variables. And obviously, if you declare a character and then you try to put a number, it will throw out an error for you. So anytime you want to give a variable a value which is a character, you got to declare it as a variable which accommodates or stores character values. Now, similarly, you have a Boolean type also. Boolean is true or false. And if you would like to, let's say, ensure that your variable is meeting certain criteria and it is going to store certain values which are true or false, you can declare it as a Boolean data type also. Okay, and similarly, all these variables you could do logical condition. They can meet some logical conditions through operators, and these operators can be for all practical reasons and or not. And if you look at it from a sequential purposes, and is used if let's say you're trying to meet two conditions or more conditions. If A and B are of one type, or A and B and C are of one type, or you put them together, could be a good condition. It's a logical operator. So and in your case is anything that meets all of those conditions. And if it is true or if it is false, it can go do whatever action you want it to do, right? Similarly, or is used in a either way kind of a scenario. If A or B, let's say you could have a condition, if any of the condition is true, the OR operator returns true value. If all the conditions fail, the OR operator simply returns a false value. So depending on your condition as to where you're using your logical operators, you could use a and or not. Okay, so not is a negative, basically a negated result. So if you want to reverse the value, if you want to take 1 and you want to make it -1, you want to make it true and you want to make it false, you can use a not as a operator. So like I said, again, an operator can be used with multiple conditions as well, and you will realize that you can use multiple operators together or in isolation depending on your code. It's a question of what the code is demanding, what you're trying to solve, or what are you trying to build. Like if you see here as an example, if you're trying to write a simple pseudocode that's saying that your library is open between, let's say, on Monday from 10 to 12 p.m. or on Wednesday between 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. You write a simple pseudocode with an if and an or and then and else conditions. Yeah, so these are all basics, and I think I'm assuming that this is also something that you all understand as operators in computers with code from a coding point of view. Just in case you don't, I have this. I will share this recording with you, but I want to just quickly get into the block code point of it with logical for introduction with loops, so that we get to the crux of it. So in loops, there are different types of loops that you should know. While, for, and nested are three different types. If you look at while loops, now the while loop is executed. Like, let's say, like I said, these are loops are essentially iterations, right? If you're trying to run something continuously, you start something, you run it till the end, again, you go back to the start. So in a cyclic way, right? And it can continue to do that while certain conditions are met. Okay, now that's why normally if you look, while is a conditional loop. Once that condition is met, it exits the loop. That means it does not go into the cycle. It can go back out of that cycle and do the next thing, and the next thing could be another cycle. Doesn't matter, right? Now, so anytime you need something to do in a sequential way, let's say you want to read a string. You want to read so for example, you want to read a specific numbers n number of times, or if you want to read a string and break it down one after the other, and you could use a for loop. Yeah, so it's more for iterating over a sequence. I'll get to that as a simple example to you, and then we'll get into the block code quickly. They nested loops are whenever you have a loop within a loop, it's called a nested loop. And there are many reasons why you would like to have a nested loop within a nested loop. I'm sorry, you can have a loop within a loop to call it a nested loop. There are many scenarios. You will realize that very quickly when you write code. Same thing you can use in block codes as well. You could have a loop, and within that loop, you could have another nested loop, right? So all that you do is take a loop block, embed it within another loop, so that it's permitted within block code. So you can do nested looping also. So it's a simple example here when it says while, if x is in this case, let's say we've declared x is equal to 0, x is not 10, then it say you please add x is equal to x plus 1, and then as long as x is not in 10, it will keep running in that loop, right? So it's as simple as that. So similarly, a for, you take a string, let's say you take a number sequence 1 3 5 7 13, and as long as it takes, and say in this case we're just building the square root of, let's say, each number, we will take the variable will take one number at a time, and as long as it's seeing all the 5 numbers or 5 numbers in that string, it will continue to square it and print it for you. Once it is the 5 is over, let's say, it terminates the loop and gets out. So this is a loop within a loop where, for example, in this case, we have a list of 1 2 3 numbers and a list of characters. Now it will keep printing the numbers first or the alphabets first, and then it will print the sequence of numbers. So first, whatever is nested within the loop, whichever is there, that gets executed first, and then it keeps coming outwards. The looping happens outward. So if there are two loops, one loop within another loop, the loop inside gets executed fully, and then it comes down to the outside loop, and then it gets into the inner loop again. So please remember that that's the only thing that is important in nested loops as to the sequence of performance. Yeah. So the rest, like I said, these are all operators are greater than, equal to, lesser than. These are all easy for you to understand. Since we are running out of time, I'm going to just quickly get into the simple examples. Just let me know if you are having any challenge with the audio or anything. I will run this if required once again. Just give me a second.
So in this screencast, we're going to look at some loop projects. So in the first one, we're going to use a repeat loop. We're going to create a new project, and when the button A is pressed, we create a counter variable. We're going to set that counter to 5, and then we're going to repeat 6 times, show the number counter, and then change the counter by -1 each time. So we're going to count down from 5. So it's going to go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, and we're going to use a loop for that. So let's just go to makecode.com now and do that. So here in makecode.com, we're going to get rid of our onStart and our forever. We're going to go to input, and we're going to say when button A is pressed, and we're going to create a variable. So we're going to make a variable. We're going to call it counter. Click OK. Then we're going to set counter to 5. I've mistyped that. It should be counter, and we're going to set it equal to 5. And then we're going to go into loops here, and you see we've got repeat 4 times. This time we're going to repeat 6 times, and we're going to show the number. So we're going to show the number counter, and then we're going to set counter or change counter by -1. So if we test this now, on button A pressed, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. And that's exactly what we wanted to do. So that is repeating it 6 times. So what we're doing here, and often you'll find when you're using loops, there are kind of 4 things that you need to be aware of. First is initializing your variable, and we're doing that by setting counter to 5. Then you have your condition, and here the condition is that it's repeating it 6 times. So somewhere in the background, it's keeping track of how many times have I done this already. And once it gets to 6, then it will fall out of it. The next thing you have is you have what are we actually doing within this loop. And in this particular case, all we're doing within the loop is that we're showing the number counter. And then the final thing is your incrementation. And here our incrementation, or in this case decrementation, is we're changing the value of counter by down by 1 every time. So we're setting it from 5 to 4 to 3 to 2 to 1. So those are really the 4 things you would tend to do within a loop. Initialization, you've got your condition, you've got what are you doing within the loop, and then you've got your incrementation or decrementation. So that's our repeat example. So we'll just have a look at another project now and see how we can use another one of the loop structures. In this project, we're going to use the while loop. So we're going to create a new project, and within that new project, we're going to have on start. So when it starts, we're going to create a variable called pressed, and we're going to set the value of that variable to false. Then we're going to have a for loop that checks to see if the value of that pressed variable is false. As long as it is, it will show press A, and then it will pause for 150 milliseconds. And then outside of, once it falls out of that loop, we're going to show the string by. Now, separate to that, we're going to have the on button A pressed, and that will set press to true. So there are 2 separate things going on separately. And then once you go back to the condition within the while loop again, so it's constantly checking it. And once the value is set to true, then it will fall out and it will show the string by. So let's go to makecode.com and make that happen. In our new project here, we have the on start and the forever. I'm just going to get rid of the forever because I don't need that one. So on start, we're going to create a variable. So we're going to make a variable, so variables, and make a variable. I'm going to call it pressed and click OK. And then once I've done that, I can set pressed to false. So set, change item to pressed. And then I'm going to go into logic and get my false value and bring that across. So now I've set up my variable and set it the value false. Then I'm going to go into my my loops. I'm going to pull across the while. So I'm saying while. Now I need to create my condition. So I'm going to go into a logic and I'm going to get the equality. So when something equals something. And then I'm saying while pressed is equal to false. And I'm going to go into logic again and find my false there and drag that across. So this is going to check to see if the value of that variable pressed is false. While it is, then it's going to do something. And what it's going to do is it's going to show the text. I'm going to go into basic, show string, press A, and you'll see over on the left hand side here that it's bringing up press A. All right, so this is as I want it to be. The next thing I wanted to do is I wanted to pause, and I'm going to get it to pause for 150 seconds. Okay, so that's my loop done. Now, once I fall out of the loop, I want to show the string by. So I'm just going to pull across show string and bring it outside of the loop, not inside of it. And here it's going to show by. And then the last thing I have to do is go to input on button A pressed. So when the button A is pressed, I just want to change my variable. So set pressed to true. So I'm going to go into logic and find true. So what's going to happen is it's going to set pressed to true. The next time within the loop that it checks to see the value of pressed is equal to false, it will find that it's not true, and then it will fall out and show the string by. So here it's saying press A, and that's been happening constantly in the background. I'm actually just going to restart here. So here it will start. Press A, it's telling me. So I'm not pressing A, so nothing is happening. It's pausing, it's showing press A again. And now I'm going to press the button A, and now you'll see that it's been set to press has been set to true, and it just says by. So that's the end of that project. So that's working as we want it to work. And that would be a typical example of the while loop. Now notice again, within this, you have your initialization. We're setting pressed to false. You've got your condition, while pressed is equal to false. You've got what are you doing within the loop, which is the show string pressed A, and then the pause. And then finally, you've got your incrementation. And the incrementation in this case is happening in the on button A pressed. In this project, we're going to use a for loop. So we're going to create a new project. And when the button A is pressed, we're going to display the numbers from 3 to 8. So we're going to use the index in the for loop to actually work out. So we're going to have Our index is going to go from 0 to 5 because we want to display 6 numbers here. The first thing we're going to do is get rid of our onStart and our forever block in our new project. And we're going to go to input and on button A pressed. Now what we're going to do in here is we're going to go to the loop and we're going to use the for loop. So for index from 0 to 4. Now I'm going to change my index from 0 to 4 to 0 to 5 because remember we want to display 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So our loop needs to go through 6 commands. So our index is going to go from 0 to 5. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to show the number. And I'm just going to be a little bit, I suppose, slick in this one because I'm going to go to math here and there's a plus block. So I'm going to show the number and you'll notice here there's an index as a variable. Now if I go into variables, my index shows in there so I can access the index of the loop. So I can bring in the index here. So show number index plus 3 because remember my starting number is going to start at 3. So I'm going to show 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Sorry, we'll just go and 8. And then so when the index is 0, we're going to show 3. When the index is 1, we're going to show 4. When the index is 2, we're going to show 5, and so on. So if I add 3 onto every index, that will give me my number. I'm just going to put in a little bit of a pause because otherwise it will go very quickly. So let's test this and see does it work. So if I press the A button, it shows 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So using the for, we can see that you have your initialization, your condition, and your incrementation all happens within that from index from 0 to 5. So it deals with the starting value, which is a 0. It deals with the incrementation, which means that it increments it 1 each time. It deals with all of that, and it checks the condition to see, have I gotten to 5 with my index? If I have, then I follow it. So all you really see with here is just where am I going to? How many times am I doing this? And then what am I doing within the loop? So that's quite a straightforward one that you can use, and that's the for. The next project we're going to look at, we'll be looking at arrays and loops. Our final project in this screencast is looking at how we can use loops to loop through the values in an array. So in the screencast that we did on arrays, we were looking at how we can access the values and looking at the indices, and we did it without using loops. I want to show you now how arrays and loops kind of go hand in hand. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new project. On start, we're going to create an array with the values 5, 7, and 9. So we're keeping it very straightforward. And then we're going to loop through the array indices and print out the value at each index. So again, we're going to get rid of the forever because we don't need it this time. So on start, we're going to create an array. So I'm going to go to variables. I'm going to make a variable called list. And click OK. And I'm going to set list to, I'll change it to list. I'm going to go to arrays and create an array. Now remember, if I want to create an array with more than one index, I just add in the values. So here I want to create an array with 3 values, and there are 3 numeric values. I'm just going to close that, and then I'm going to go to math and find the zeros so that I can put in values. So if I go into math again and find the 0, I'm just going to drag it across. So now I'm going 5 and 7 and 9. So that's set up my array with my 3 values. Next, I want to go to loops, and I'm going for index from 0 to, and in this case, my index is going from 0 to 2 because I've got 3 values, and I'm going to do show number, and the number I'm going to show is, I'm going to just go into arrays here, because I want to get the value. So list get value at, and instead of 0 every time, I can use the index variable that I have here. So I'm just going to go to variables, pull across my index. So this is saying get the value at index of the list. So you'll see here on the left hand side it's showing this. So on start, again, and it's showing 5 and then 7 and then 9 exactly as I wanted. So this is a typical example of using a loop. Now you could use any of the loops here. You could use the repeat loop. You could just repeat it 3 times, but then you're going to have to set up an index variable. You could use the while loop. Again, you'd have to set up an index variable that you can access. So in this case, I would say that the for loop fits perfectly because it already has an index predefined as such, and then you can use that index. So I hope you found these projects useful for loops. and we'll look at some other things in the next screencast. So in this screencast,
so that was the basic session on loops for you. Unfortunately, there's only so much we can show in loops for with respect to let's say with block codes, but as you get into arrays and other stuff, it gets even more interesting, and we could build larger pieces of code as the days go by. But I think for loops, just to quickly summarize, for a while loop, you're running a condition for the example that you've seen, and that's pretty much a condition that as long as that condition is met, it will keep iterating. And when it comes to the while loop, you've seen that if you've taken an array or you're taking a sequence of numbers and you're running it through the loop, and when the conditions are met, it would do an example as a display on the screen that you've seen. And nested loops are obviously loops within loops that you can do. Arrays is a topic that we will be covering in the next 3 days. So I think we will get into something more interesting with arrays as well. For those of you who are teaching at the basic level, arrays can be a little stressful for school children. You all know that probably, but arrays and functions are the next topics that we will be covering in the order. And right now, if with respect to make code or anything from a block code perspective, you have any questions, I will be able to take them. Please do let me know. And with respect to the sessions, that while we wait for individuals to ask me questions, I'm just trying to see what are the kind of questions that people are asking. And then I think let's see, most of them seem to be about the, just give me a quick second. Most of them seem to be about the part A sessions, and they want the, it looks like most people want the certification, redeeming issues, recording of the session issues. If there are any other, please do let me know. Any questions? I will share the, I'm going to be sharing the redeem code as well as the feedback loop, the link in the chat box for all of you to access. I have put it there, and I think for those of you who are asking questions about the same point, please look at it. I have published both the redeem code as well as the feedback link. I will, yes, kindly send me the recording of the training session one more time. Yeah, I have not shared these links yet, but yes, definitely we will share the link with you as soon as the session is over. Any questions, please? Any other questions that you have? If you have any questions as to how you are, you're able to redeem your, I hope all of you are registered on the Educator portal. And also, while we have a few minutes, I would like to strongly encourage your schools. Please do consider registering for Imagine Cup Juniors. It's a worldwide competition for school kids that Microsoft conducts every year. It's a fantastic program, especially for school children with innovative ideas and where they could use their coding skills and put it to test. No really great projects have to be developed, but great ideas definitely need to be developed. People need to know how to put up a flow chart together and give a schematic representation of their idea. And this is something that I strongly encourage schools to please encourage your children to participate in Imagine Cup Juniors. Is for school kids under 12th grade. They can form teams up to 6 members and register online. And I think Microsoft will be, you can just go and type Imagine Cup Junior on your search engine and get to the registration doors and the windows. They will be opening up in the month of December. So I strongly urge that please get your teams together. And if you need any information on Imagine Cup Junior, I will be happy to share some information with you, some information about how last year's sessions happened, competitions happened. I will be very happy to share all of that with you as well. All right. So if there is any information that you think you need that will help your school children, get into this, I will, write to all of you for a separate session and Imagine Cup if required. And I'd be happy to take a 1 hour or half an hour session on that as well. And any other course that you think you need information on from the CBSE curriculum perspective, please do let us know. We have a session tomorrow, so any feedback from your side about today's session will be very useful for us to enhance the experience that you may have tomorrow and make sure that these sessions are relevant. And we can make it even more interesting for all of you. And for all of you, those who are already from the computer science departments and who are teaching code, I do understand this could be something which you've already done and covered many times, but from a block code perspective, if there is some other specific questions that you may have, please don't hesitate to ask, and I will be very happy to answer them. All right, so since we're coming to the end of the session time, if there are no questions and there are no specific ones coming my way, I will end the session here. And Navdeep has been kind enough to answer a lot of the questions asked, but they seem to be more generic in nature. I think they all seem to be about the recording and mostly about the redeeming aspect. Navdeep, would you like to add anything here at this point of time?
Hello, sir. I can take them to the Microsoft Educator Center and can show them those who are new that how to.
Yes, please. You have the access
redeem.
presentation, right? Anyway,
Yeah.
You can please go ahead. So
I think I can't share. I have joined through the.
Okay.
I can't share my screen.
I will. 1 second. Let me try to log into the Educator. Shall I go ahead and share the screen?
Sir, I'll put the URL of Educator Center.
I just put as well. I'm just sharing it with them as well, just in case they want to see it. So for all of you, I think who've been asking this question repeatedly, I hope you can see the screen here that I put up. The URL is quite clear there, education.microsoft.com. You can, and I think Navdeep has just put in it as well. So you can just please look at that link. So you can just go to education.microsoft.in. All that you need to do is have a simple live ID, and depending on whether you're a K-12 educator or a higher education, please click on that, and it's a 3-step process, very easy for you to get enrolled, and you would be able to enjoy all the benefits of the Educator program. And there are plenty You have free access to a lot of interesting content, a lot of community that you can access, and you would have early preview to a lot of interesting announcements and have the advantage over the others that probably may not understand what else is happening in Microsoft. So this could be a very powerful tool for you as educators, and there are many interesting programs that Microsoft conducts for educators, and this could be a very valuable opportunity for all of you to enroll and get early information on all of these programs. There are certain benefits that go beyond just giving you access to free content and access and invitations to events and programs. There are several other initiatives that Microsoft takes, you know, that they conduct year on year, and that you may have the privilege of actually being some of these nominees. You get nominated into interesting conferences, you get invited into events which otherwise you may not have the opportunity or visibility to. So I strongly urge all of you to please do register and enjoy the benefits, and redeeming these codes is just one simple step, but it is more powerful than just getting a certificate. Yeah. Navdeep, is there anything else, or can we call it end today? So we'll stop here since there are no questions being asked. It's a Satwant Kaur from Jammu Sanskriti School. Is there a question you're asking, or you just announcing yourself? I didn't understand that. Okay, so there don't seem to be any questions, so we'll end the session here. Thank you all for attending this session and being here today. I do know that we have written multiple times to all of you, and we strongly encourage you to please do attend these sessions, as many as you can, and as many times as you can as well, because every session is different, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow again. Yeah, thank you all. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
डॉक्टर कहीं और ये या को दीप्ति कोना गोटा छोटा छोटा हजार हजार वाला से आनी छी